Good morning on this Sunday, December 18th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says it's time to end general election runoffs in Georgia, but do other Georgia leaders agree? Supporters of Buckhead cityhood ramp up efforts after another violent week in metro Atlanta, including the stabbing of an elderly Buckhead woman. And does a county commission have the authority to draw their own lines, or is that up to the legislature? Phil, Theron, and Martha are all here. Melita has the week off. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is proposing a major change to Georgia's general elections. Do away with the runoff system. Georgia is only one of a handful of states that requires 50% plus one for a candidate to win an election. Phil, we'll start with you this week. We're coming off another grueling runoff season where we saw Senator Raphael Warnock fend off his Republican challenger Herschel Walker. The question is, will lawmakers be able to agree on how to change the system? I mean, we're hearing about lowering the threshold to 45% plus one, ranked choice. Like, what's out there?
Well, I think we ought to look at this since this is a center-right state politically still, and since the Republicans do control the legislature, I think I'm going to look at this like they would from a center-right perspective. I would keep the runoff, but I would do some tweaks. I think the Libertarians, and I think a lot of Democrats might agree with this, are really a problem because they often laugh how they throw these things into runoff. They get 2 or 3%. I think we're going to have a bigger requirement so they can not do that. They have to show more support in the state. And secondly, I would be open. I would hope the Republicans would be open to maybe extending one more week for a runoff. And I don't mind. I don't care about the Saturday voting. I think that would be good for both parties. You heard me say last week I want more Republicans to early vote. But I think the Republicans will probably keep the runoff.
Theron, there's going to be a lot of debate on this issue. If you know, Republicans want to move forward and maybe change the system.
Well, since I have a little bit more time today, I want to give our voters some context here. Our current runoff system that we have in Georgia was introduced in 1963, and it was proposed by a man named Denmark Groover, a staunch segregationist, who said, I quote, his runoff voting bill would prevent the Negro bloc vote from controlling the elections. It was put into place for primaries in 1964 and runoff elections in 1966. Former State Representative James McKay, who advocated for the bill in the legislature, said keeping the plurality of voting in place will result, and I quote from this former state representative, the Negroes and the pressure groups and the special interests are going to manipulate the state and take charge. So we have to start from that point. Now, I will attempt today to keep this conversation civil because that's what we need in this conversation.
Please.
However, the fact that the Secretary of State Raffensperger said we just need to do away with the runoff systems, I think that first we got to ask ourselves, why is he saying that now? Now, I think he will explain that. Two, at a time where Democrats are actually winning runoffs in Georgia, we just won a very tough runoff to re-elect Senator Warnock. We've got to be very, very careful about embracing this change without with the lack of evidence that it actually the change would work. What I would say to the Secretary of State is that let's come forward with some solutions. Let's give the voters an opportunity to have some input. But I think that we should look at this proposal with a high level of scrutiny, and we should analyze it. And I think there's got to be a question around equity on both sides, making sure that everyone feels like their voices are heard. Last thing is this. You heard a lot of people say the lines were too long, and I agree. People were turning away from voting. Some people didn't go back. And I would say at a time where it is a very expensive runoff, why don't we actually take some of that money and actually make it more of an incentive for poll workers to want to work those long holiday hours? I think that will help deal with the problem. And then lastly, we got to have a conversation about Senate Bill 202. This change that was Republican-led with Senate Bill 202 is the change that went to the 4-week runoff. So there's a bill right now that's been pre-filed by State Representative Jasmine Clark to go to a 6-week runoff. And so I think you're going to see a robust debate in the legislature.
Martha, there is a lot to digest here, especially after what Theron talked about. But, you know, I want to ask you, because do Republicans want to look at maybe changing the system because it's really not working as well for them as we've seen in the past with, you know, going back to 1992 with White Fowler? And and Paul Coverdell, and then 2008 it was Saxby Chambliss and Jim Martin. So is it just like, well, it's not working for us, let's change it?
You know, I don't think so, but I've been on record for years talking about the racial nature of runoffs. I've talked about that, and all the people that Theron mentioned were Democrats, okay? So, you know, including some people that have changed their views since then, and I think people can change their views over time as they become more educated. But Reverend Warnock would have won in the general had there not been a runoff. So I don't think it's about a political reason for doing this. I think it is that there is a place for runoffs maybe in primaries that can be made, and that in general elections it's not uncommon to go with a plurality on that. You know, I think Kelly Loeffler would have probably won. I don't know if she won. I think Warnock won the one in before in the general also.
David
That came
Perdue
first.
won over Ossoff.
No, but that's true. That's true. But
general.
I'm talking about Senator Warnock. But you're right, absolutely. So I think there is a reason to look at this. I would go two-pronged with this. I think it needs to be looked at, number one. Number two, I think that we do have ranked choice voting that we have been using with overseas ballots. So we do have a pilot, if you will, that we could look at and
That's a
see
really good point.
how ranked choice voting works and if it has worked. I really don't buy, with all due respect, the whole thing that somehow the shorter time suppressed voting, because the numbers don't bear that out, the data doesn't bear that out. But I don't disagree that we need to look at possibly lengthening the runoff if we keep it. But I'm in favor of getting rid of it. Me personally, I think that it is a vestige from a different way of looking at voting. And you know, primaries, I understand it because you want the person to represent the party. But I think that in the general election, it should go.
Phil, Secretary Raffensperger kind of just put this idea out there, but didn't really give any follow-up.
Right.
We're looking to Governor Kemp so he can weigh in. He hasn't said anything as of this taping. What do you think we're going to hear from these Republican leaders?
Well, I think they're going to look at the data, and I think they're going to probably conclude that what I'm saying, I think they have to do something about the libertarians, because they take away from both parties, frankly. They used to take away more from Republicans. But I think there has to be a threshold to have somebody like that in a runoff.
I'll say this real quick, and again, I must add too, because you know I was corrected this week. The goal of this runoff that was proposed by segregationists when we were in a one-party system that was a Democrat, you're absolutely right, Martha, was also put in place to dilute the voter participation in urban areas. And
I
so,
agree
yeah,
with you about
okay.
that.
So let's
Yes.
so you know, some people may criticize that, hey, Theron is only pointing out the intent for black voters, but it was also urban.
And it was also, let me interrupt you, it was also to hurt the Republicans. There was no Republican Party before 1964 in the state of Georgia.
Right.
I just want viewers to know that.
That's where you chime in for the Republicans. I have to
Right.
defend it. But real quick, Lori, I do think that we got to do something. And the ranked choice is very confusing. And so you're going to need some time to really educate Georgia voters on the ranked choice in an instant sort of runoff. And so my thing is, to your point, Raffensperger put it out there. He's a former state legislator himself. He's going to let the folks sort of debate it. But I think Democrats have got to be very, very careful about immediately embracing this change.
But I will say this session is going to be very much about how we prepare for the economic downturn that may or may not be coming. And I think a lot of these other issues are not going to end up being addressed. That's just my thoughts on that.
We'll see. Here's another issue we want to talk about. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is prohibiting the use of TikTok in the state's executive branch of government, joining many other Republican governors in banning the popular social media app. In a memo sent to the state's agency heads, Kemp cited concerns over the platform's Chinese ownership and growing worries over its possible national security threat. Darren, we know at least one Republican lawmaker is also looking to ban the app in Georgia, period. As the mother of a teenager, I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Well, we do know that anytime we download an app on our phones, and not just TikTok, right? Let's just any app or any new program, there are security vulnerabilities that we are subjected to. And so the fact that you have these state phones that are promoted to people, given to people to basically do quote unquote state business. But I think that we got to be very careful, because this could be perceived as sort of a conservative movement to be really kind of anti. And again, I say it could be perceived. I'm not saying it is. I don't think the governor, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's not doing it for that reason. But I think you're going to see some people say, hey, you know, maybe this state is going a little too far. But ultimately, I think if it's a security issue and we want to make sure that we don't have those vulnerabilities, then I think it should be looked at.
Phil is smirking.
It's not an if, it is a security issue. Let's be blunt, this is Chinese spyware, communist Chinese spyware, and other states are doing this too. I'm in favor of a ban totally. I mean, why do I say this? They know your location. They can find your location. It's a data gatherer. And so I think it's very dangerous. The Chinese Communist Party controls the company that does TikTok. Let's be blunt about that.
Well, I don't like it because I don't like what's targeting teens. The content that is on there is
the content is terrible.
safe.
And it's not just TikTok. I mean, I think there's a problem with social media apps on government phones, period. Of course, the argument can be made, we have these accounts that we're putting information on, but look, I've worked in offices, they're not just looking at the government accounts. They're scrolling through and looking at their content, and that is distracting.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, Atlanta police do their job arresting suspects in high-profile murders, but will the judges in Fulton County follow through? We'll discuss straight ahead.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Another violent week in Metro Atlanta. A 77-year-old elderly woman was stabbed in her home located in a gated community in Buckhead. Atlanta police nabbed the suspect who had several previous arrests. But Martha, you know, this has again ignited the debate over a Buckhead city. Supporters of a Buckhead city movement say they're seeing more yard signs in favor of their movement than ever before.
And this story has been picked up all over the country. And the big difference, even though, and I don't want to compare this to the story in Idaho, but in Idaho there weren't a lot of cameras. Okay, in this Buckhead community there were a lot of cameras. So there was a quick arrest. There was a lot of video that's being shown, and look, it's a serious problem, and it is giving fodder for the Buckhead City movement. I think it's still going to be challenging to get anything like that through, but this is just a horrific crime, and it's mainly because it's an elderly woman. It reminded me of, you know, the Katherine Johnson murder a number of years ago that caught so much attention, because it just seems like when you get to that point in your life, you shouldn't be murdered. You should die another way.
Theron, as a Democrat on the panel, does this worry you that, you know, it's just inciting that, but really just motivating the Buckhead City movement again?
Well, first I want to give my sincere condolences to the Bowles family.
Yes.
I mean, you look at all the people coming out talking about this wonderful grandmother, Eleanor Bowles, and so I want to, you know, say to the family, you know, sorry that this horrific event happened. But I also want to echo what the son said, and he has gone out and had made several appearances on camera. And when he called for Lori, he said, "Look, I want the community to come together. Let's figure out a way that we can play a role working with law enforcement and our leadership to decrease the amount of crime that we're seeing, not just in Buckhead, but all over the city of Atlanta, and quite frankly, in the region and in the state." I just don't think that this group, the Buckhead City movement, there are some good people that support that movement. Some of them are my neighbors, some of them I've talked to, but don't allow it to be hijacked by one or two individuals that are trying to raise money on the death of a grandmother in Buckhead. And that's where I kind of draw the line. But yeah, does it reignite the concern about a Buckhead City? Absolutely. But I just encourage people to come together. Let's figure out how we can play a role in dealing with this public safety crisis.
Well, Phil, we also saw another arrest in the murders of 12 and 15-year-old kids near Atlantic Station. In so many of these cases, Atlanta police are nabbing the suspects, but then we're finding out about previous crimes, and folks are wondering, how are these people ever allowed to walk free in the first place?
Well, I'm glad you're asking that question, because that's what everybody's asking in the city of Atlanta and around the state. And it's a multifaceted problem that we've talked about here on the gang plenty of times, and it brings into focus with what we're talking about today. Yeah, the police can arrest these people, but it's like the scumbag that allegedly killed the lady we're talking about. He had a rap sheet a mile long. There was no reason why he should have been out. In fact, the city jail, and this is what really should upset everyone, the city jail refused to take him. That's why he was out on the street.
He was hurt, though, and they really said you needed to go to Grady.
Well, that's the oldest trick in the world. But anyhow, that's another story for another time.
From my understanding of what I read.
You know, you're a kind person. But anyhow, he should have been. He should have been jailed, and he should have been given medical attention.
I don't think he should have been out. I agree.
Thank you. I didn't think you were that permissive. But anyhow, the point here is the judges. The point here is the judge. You got magistrate judges, yes, they deal with misdemeanors, but they're releasing people with a no cash, no bail policy that the mayor and council instituted several years ago in Atlanta, and they have felonies on these rap sheets, even though they're in for a misdemeanor. I think we ought to have the legislature, talking about the legislature, we ought to stop no cash, no bail.
Is it time for the legislature to step in on this issue, Theron?
Well, I think Phil made some good points, and then of course he politicized some of the points as well. But
not
not disagreeing. I'm civility today, civility. Look, it's a multi-pronged approach. You can't put all this burden on our police officers to arrest bad people when they get arrested and they go and they stand trial or they're in jail, they're let out, and it's just a revolving door. And so then you can't put all this, responsibility on the mayor and the chief, because everybody's got to do their job. And so I do think the legislature needs to have a conversation about it. But I think we have to make sure that we're empowering our judges, our district attorneys, our police officers, and our leadership to do their jobs better before you start, going to the state. But I agree with Phil. I think that the judges have got to be held more accountable, and I would impose that if you're letting someone out that has a rap sheet of just consistent crimes, the public needs to know about it. I mean, and we need to do a better job of informing people of what these judges are or are not doing, so we can hold them accountable.
All right. Well, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation said 5 people face domestic terrorism charges, accused Tuesday of throwing rocks and bottles at police cars and EMTs along Boulder Crest Road near the planned site for what critics call, quote, Cop City in DeKalb County. Martha, it's one thing to protest. It's another when these turn violent, and several of the people arrested aren't even from local communities. They're from Maine, Nebraska, I was reading, California, and Wisconsin.
I mean, look, whether you're talking about the riots in the summer of 2020, the riots at the Capitol on January 6th, or this, when you cross the line from being a peaceful protester to trying to damage property, you've gone too far. That should be something we all agree on, regardless of the politics, that it is just not acceptable. Be out there and protest every day. Make your voice heard. Be out there. But when you start throwing rocks, you could hurt someone, and that's not what peaceful protest is about.
Theron.
Well, the one thing that our viewers should know is that this is a problem. But the one thing that I'm actually learning more is that this has been a sort of a multi-jurisdictional approach. The state, the FBI, the county, the cities, everyone that's involved have actually been dealing with this issue for a while. And so there's I think a plan in place. I know District Attorney Sheriff Boston and others have actually been meeting with the GBI and the state and Attorney General Carr's office. The last thing I would say is this, is that you want to do it in a very safe way. If these people are going to peacefully protest, they have that right. But if it gets
But they're not.
They're not. So now you got to figure out, how do you protect the men and women, the police officers who have to go in there and enforce it, because we don't want to lose lives, and we don't want the protesters' lives to be lost either. So that's where it becomes a delicate balance.
I mean, Phil, some of these folks have even targeted like the contractors who will be building the Cop City and going to their homes. I mean, it's just
they've gone way beyond that. They've been shooting at people. They've been they found Molotov cocktails there. They've started fires. They started a fire last week. So there should have been. You've heard me say this on the show. There should have been a crackdown 8 weeks ago, and I'm sorry, Theron, DeKalb County should have nipped this in the bud 8 months ago. This has been going on far too long. Yeah, it got multi-jurisdictional because the governor said, I'm going to have to step in if DeKalb County can't do anything, so he got the state troopers and the GBI in there. Thankfully, finally, these are Marxists, anarchists, just people, I'm not calling names, they describe themselves that way. And they're violent. Yes, Martha, you're right. This cannot be tolerated. If they can do something peacefully, that's fine, but they have to clean it out.
I respectfully disagree. The county, DeKalb County, along with this multi-jurisdictional approach, have been working on this for a long time. So let's not give all the credit to the state. They have a role to play.
DeKalb should have been arresting earlier.
But let's not mislead our viewers to say that the county has not been doing anything.
No one's misleading them.
They have been doing their part.
They should have done it earlier with arrests.
So my thing is that there were also arrests made from the local level, the county level, district attorney as well. There was, you have to go through that process. But the state cooperation along with the county is a good thing. So let's not start giving too much credit and trying to make this political. We got to get this problem solved.
These type of protesters, they won't stop, and so they're going to send in more people. So you've got to stay vigilant about it.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Up next, a fight over redistricting in Cobb County heads to the courts. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The fight over redistricting in Cobb County heads to the courts after commissioners took the unprecedented step of invoking the home rule statute when it comes to redrawing district lines. The Cobb Elections Board is expected to file a motion in Cobb Superior Court to clarify next steps. Phil, this has turned into quite a battle.
It has, Lori, but I think the state law is very clear, and it's before the Cobb County Superior Court right now. It could be appealed. I think that it's very clear that the state law passed by the legislature and signed by the governor cannot be overridden by some home rule argument, and there's precedent for that. So I think ultimately the Cobb County Democrat-controlled commission is going to lose this, and the legislative districts are going to stay put.
But they're not going down without a fight.
No, I mean, let's add some context to this. I mean, you remember we were talking about how the lack of transparency with these maps, particularly in Cobb County, I think that was one of the big things, that it wasn't transparent, that they wanted to change these local lines was at face an issue. And you saw the Cobb County delegation, many of the Democrats, all of them tried to stop it. So it was particularly aimed at Jerica Richardson, who's a county commissioner there. They totally redrew her district. And she, in a very sophisticated, aggressive way, pushed back. And this county has basically elected with their peer vote that no, we're going to challenge these maps. And we want to go with the maps that are fair, that they've come up with. So now it's going to be left up to a judge, a Superior Court judge in Cobb County, to determine do you take the state maps or do you take the local maps? But I think that you have to go back to how we got to this problem. But I just want to commend Commissioner Jerica Richardson and our fellow commissioners too for doing the right thing and reinstilling local control. And I think that these maps should be upheld.
By the way, a footnote, she moved into a Republican district.
That has nothing to do with it.
That kind of started things.
Yeah, but I think that, look, she can show the proof of residency.
Oh, yeah.
She's been there. She follows the local law and state law. She should be able to serve that district.
All right, well, this is going to be decided in the court, so we'll move on. 27,000 Atlanta water customers may soon have their service shut off for failure to take action to pay their bills. Martha, a couple of surprising numbers here. One, we're talking about $130 million in unpaid bills, and the city has not cut off water in 12 years for residential customers. They've given them enough time.
I think yeah, that's an understatement. We need to have a policy about, and I'm sure they do, but they're not following it clearly. You get this many unpaid water bills, they're not following their policy. You've got to have a situation where after this certain amount of time, you question it, you notify, and then you have to turn off. I know that it's not popular to turn somebody's water off. I mean, that's not a popular thing to do. But if they've waited 12 years, I mean, come on. I think it's got to be done. They got to be paid. I mean, I'm so glad I'm on a well. I haven't paid a water bill in 25 years. So
but 12 years is quite a grace period. And according to the Department of Watershed Commissioner Makita Browning, that is quite a grace period.
Well, Commissioner Browning does a fantastic job of leading
a
very tough situation with a department that we all depend on, right?
And trying to be helpful to folks who can't pay their bills. But let's face it, a lot of these are commercial.
Well, that's what I'm getting to. So again, I have to first applaud Commissioner Browning, and then two, we really need to know, like, how many of this 27,000 are actually commercial versus residential. Other question you have to ask yourself, are these people who are contesting their water bills, or they just have flat out not paid them at all?
Or are they paying something?
And then, the famous term, and Phil and I were chuckling about this earlier, we had a former mayor who said, I just put something on it. She said, I'll just pay my bill. But she was doing it, Mayor Bottoms at a time, where there was some back and forth on whether or not the actual price was okay. But ultimately, look, I think that I worry about if you start turning off people's waters, particularly in January, this is when it's being proposed, right out the holiday season, I think about the kids. And I think about the families who really need this water. So I know that Commissioner Browning is doing what she's doing it now. She's using this show, she's using the earned media to warn residents, hey, if you're not paying your bill, it's going to be shut off. So hopefully we'll see people proactively pay their bills.
And there are programs out there to help folks. There are payment plans and everything else.
That's a good point. And Theron, you're making a good point. Let's wait till the summer to start cutting them off.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
but I agree with Lori. 12 years, come on. But you're making a good point. I'd like to know if these people have actually contested it, or if they're just trying to game the system.
And pay something. Pay something.
Yeah, pay something.
Yes. Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there because we got time for winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Our word of the week, civility, right?
That's right. That's right.
Martha, we'll start with you.
Well, winners this week, of course, they passed into law and the president signed a bill renaming the VA Medical Center for Senator Cleland and the VA offices for Senator Isaacson, both veterans, both people that have worked very hard for veterans. And so everybody involved in that is a winner this week. Senator Ossoff did a great not only interview on my show, but I travel around to a bunch of local media and did interviews this week. There's another senator that could learn from that. That would be great. And
I
so
agree.
He's a winner this week. And fans of the show, everywhere I go, thank you so much. I can't, if I start trying to name you, I'm going to leave someone out, but thank you so much for all the kind words that you said.
Theron.
Got it. Definitely want to make the first winner happy birthday to the Cobb County, who's a client, and wish them a happy 200 years bicentennial. They celebrated last week, and at that bicentennial, I saw a standing room only of people from North DeKalb, South DeKalb, historians, leadership. It was awesome. And at that event, I met Curtis Williams, who's a major and chief of staff of the DeKalb County Police Department. Big fan of the show. Want to thank him.
Awesome.
And then lastly, John Lewis Stamp will be instituted by the post office next year. So definitely a tremendous honor for the
And that's going to be a
Congressman.
collector's item for sure. Phil.
I don't know how much time I have.
50 seconds.
But
52.
I want to give a shout out to Billy Webster. He is the county commission chairman over in Putnam County. That's kind of our second home over there by Lake Oconee. He had 12 years of service. He's stepping down. Hooray for him. And I've got a winner, Senator Brandon Beach, and of course the new Lieutenant Governor, Burt Jones. They were done dirty by outgoing Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. You remember he stripped them of their committee chairmanships because he didn't like some of their politics. Well, the worm has turned, and now they are having, Beach has a powerful committee assignment, Jones is Lieutenant Governor, and Duncan has gone on the trash heap of history.
Well, what goes around comes around, I guess, right? That's what we say in
Amen.
politics. All right, thank you, everybody, and we will see you again next week. Make it a good one. Bye-bye.